if you give your mind all of your attention, then you give yourself away to the mind. There's a way in which you then come to identify with mind. You empower it. You give it meaning that is not necessary to give. Mind is a movement that's much like all the other movements that you perceive all throughout the day. You perceive the in and out breath. You perceive the bird flying overhead and hear its song. You may hear the sound of the wind or the sound of a car going by. And interestingly enough, you may not attribute these comings and goings with much meaning. You may not give them a type of power and find your identification with them. Locate your sense of self in those comings and goings. But curiously enough, often we identify with the comings and goings of thought in our head. And in that way, we give them special meaning, personal meaning. We empower them in a way that perhaps may not be necessary. This is for you to look at. But I can say that I've seen, after talking to many people, after examining my own experience, that when you look closely, you can see how you give the mind certain meaning, why certain thoughts seem so important. Perhaps they're a thought that may seem to keep you safe. Perhaps they're a thought that's just simply conditioned and familiar, something that you were taught, that you were told to value, that may be valuable at times, but may not be necessary to value at other times. So it can be very important to actually look at where your energy is being invested, what you give your attention to, and to really examine what the intention is behind that investment, what it is that you're really valuing in that moment. And perhaps when you see what you're valuing, you might choose to reevaluate it. Let me see if I can give you an example. You might feel overwhelmed in a given situation. You might conclude the thought that something's wrong. And when you conclude that something's wrong, your system may go into further confusion, further searching for some safety, some better experience, some different experience. And there's a way in which, if you can even stop for a moment and see that it may not be necessary to conclude something's wrong. You may have started out with simply confusion, disorientation. You can acknowledge that experience without attributing the meaning that something's wrong. And if you even pause for a moment and have the consideration, maybe I'm confused. Do I need to make that wrong? And you just pause that conclusion of wrong. Then your experience is right back with perhaps simply confusion. But you may not go into alarm mode or overwhelm like you may after you conclude that that's wrong. And then you perhaps will experience being intimate with just the energy of confusion, that stirring energy that's disoriented. And you may notice as you're intimate with that experience that which is noticing the confusion, it's not moving. It's not confused. It's not stirring. So when you get to know your mind and you see it very clearly, this is making friends with the mind. This is getting to know its patterns, getting to know what it values, understanding its motives. Often, conclusions of the mind that can cause us great stress or division or a sense of separate self. Basically, any sense of suffering, if you look close, you can see that they're often well-intended. Perhaps the mind is trying to free you from having to experience a state like confusion. It's making every effort to keep you safe from that. And yet, perhaps this effort of mind is not necessary. Perhaps it creates a greater sense of confusion or division. And when you see that more clearly, then you can choose whether or not you value that thought pattern. And you can examine if perhaps you may value another approach. It's this seeing things ever more clearly, that consciously, that allows you to begin to know yourself and life in a different way that's outside of habits of mind.